It's a great pleasure to be here this morning. To begin with, in terms of context, the U.S. has a very long history of capturing documents during wartime and then making them or copies of them available to scholars. We have records in the National Archives, copies of records, that is, from the War of 1812, captured from British ships and from British soldiers, from the Confederacy, from U.S. military operations in the Philippines, in the war against Mexico, World War II, of course, massive amounts of documents there from the Germans and the Japanese, Italians, and from the Russians, thanks to the Germans for capturing them initially. And then, of course, from subsequent conflicts as well, in Korea, in Vietnam, in Panama, and then finally the two conflicts that I started off with. As an interesting aside, after World War II, in efforts to categorize the records and microfilm them before returning them to the Germans, the Army came together with the AHA, with the American Historical Association, and together formed a committee called the American Committee for the Study of War Documents, and solicited assistance and received assistance from the AHA in preparing these records for subsequent scholarly use. So what we're doing has a very long history, and I've just talked about the US experience. Of course, other countries have gone through very similar experiences. But our center finds its vision it finds its genesis in the vision of Secretary Gates, the Secretary of Defense. 2 years ago in a speech, public speech, he noted, "Let me be clear that the key principle of all components of the Minerva Consortia, under which our center falls, will be complete openness and rigid adherence to academic freedom and integrity. There will be no room for sensitive but unclassified or other such restrictions in this project. We are interested in furthering our knowledge of these issues and in soliciting diverse points of view, regardless of whether those views are critical of the department's efforts. Too many mistakes have been made over the years because our government and military did not understand or even seek to understand the countries or cultures we are dealing with." And this is something that we take very seriously at the CRC. I first became involved with the CRC type work and working with the captured records a number of years ago. I was a graduate student in Los Angeles and received my edition of Foreign Affairs, in which there was an article called Saddam's Delusions, a short article written by Kevin Woods and a few other analysts at the Institute for Defense Analyses, which is a federally funded and research and development center, essentially a type of DoD-wide think tank, where they had been conducting research for the Secretary of Defense and for the Department of Defense based on these captured records. I read this article, was enthralled. I stayed up all night reading the larger report, about a 200-page report on Saddam's thinking and Iraqi decision-making in the prelude to the 2003 invasion, and I subsequently contacted Mr. Woods and asked him how I could become involved. I interned, I stayed on the Institute for Defense Analyses under contract with OSD, set up this center at the National Defense University. We're located in Washington, D.C. We have a digital archive, and I've been involved in it ever since. It's been absolutely fascinating. Our center has three primary missions. First, to achieve the Secretary of Defense's vision of fostering research using captured records. Second, to balance academic, national security, and humanitarian considerations. And we view all three as absolutely essential. And I'll focus a little bit on the humanitarian considerations that we're involved in that might be a little different than what some of the other panelists have discussed and dealt with. Finally, we also will release small collections of documents for specific academic conferences online. However, the small CRC staff must balance this effort with building the collection of records in our database and facilitating research. Right now, there are only 5 employees at our center, so you can imagine the workload that we have and what's possible and what isn't. This summer, we'll be co-sponsoring a conference with the Woodrow Wilson Center, in which we'll release approximately 30 records online dealing with the Iran-Iraq War. And in a few weeks, on January 20th, we'll release 3 records online, transcripts of meetings between Saddam and his inner circle from February 24th of 1991, the day that ground operations began to liberate Kuwait. But these will be exceptions, and there'll be small numbers of documents compared to what's available in our center. To get a sense of the type of research that's possible for you to conduct and the type of materials available, you might want to refer to a number of previous analyses that have come out and been released. I mentioned one, which was Kevin Woods' study with his co-authors, the Iraqi Perspectives Project, the initial report on Iraqi decision-making prior to the 2003 invasion and during the invasion. There's a 5-volume series out there on, or not series, excuse me, a 5-volume set on Saddam's relations and lack of relations with different terrorist organizations. This is particularly interesting since 4 volumes of it is essentially just the primary source records. So that's useful. There's a great study done by Kevin Woods on the 1991 Gulf War. And I've been part of a book that we hope will be coming out shortly. We've submitted it to an academic press for publication based on Saddam's captured audio files. In one very real sense, Saddam was like Nixon. He liked to record things. And we have over 2,300 hours of Saddam on tape, talking with generals, talking with his cabinet, his Revolutionary Command Council, foreign dignitaries, diplomats, tribal sheikhs, you name it. There's an awful lot there. This book is essentially a documentary reader based very loosely on Zelikow and May's The Kennedy Tapes, and hopefully that will be out very shortly. In terms of our current holdings, right now we have about just over 1,100 records in our digital database that we make available to scholars. The majority of these are from Saddam's Iraq, probably about 80% of them. Whereas about 20% are from Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda affiliated movements, primarily from Afghanistan. The Al-Qaeda records are organized thematically based on intelligence, plans, operations, and so forth. By contrast, the Iraqi records, they're all state records dealing with national security issues, and they are categorized by originating agency, whether one of Saddam's intelligence agencies, the Foreign Ministry, the Fedayeen Saddam, or one of the other groups as well. We have one category there, the Saddam tapes, which I just described a minute ago, the last I checked, it had 135 tapes. We have full English translations as well as the original. In the case of the tapes, it would be the original Arabic, spoken. With the documents, it would be hard copies of the documents, digital copies of those. Our center, the quality of the translations varies wildly, so I very strongly encourage visiting researchers to either have be proficient in Arabic or bring someone who can assist them who is. Some of the translations are beautiful, some of them really aren't, and should be used more as finding aids. And we can help you to the degree that we can, but as I mentioned, we have a very small staff. And I'm happy to talk with people about specifics.